I never wanted to see myself as someone who lived in a twisted game of sabotage and deception. If you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have described my husband, Daniel, as a confident, charismatic man with an affable grin and a sharp sense of humor, someone who could banter his way into any circle of friends. But that was before. Before the mocking, before the secret schemes, before the day he proved, beyond all doubt, that I needed to plan for a future without him. I remember the moment I realized I had to protect myself. It was neither a single defining event nor a flashy blowout argument. Rather, it was the subtle changes in Daniel's behavior and words, little hints that, in the beginning, I was too naive or too hopeful to interpret correctly. His offhand remarks about how it was cute that I wanted to apply for jobs in the city, how it was adorable that I spent time sending out resumes online, how someone like me, he insisted, would never quite make it in the competitive world out there. At first, I took it as a misguided attempt at humor, a quip from a husband who simply didn't know how to encourage. But the days turned to weeks, the weeks to months, and soon the jabs grew sharper, more personal. The day he told me I should stick to vacuuming and cooking, since that's where my real talent lay, I caught a glimpse of a man who never truly believed in me. His words were as casual as an evening remark about the weather, but the sting they carried reverberated through my soul. That was precisely 1 week before the news that changed my life. It came on a Friday afternoon. I was folding laundry in the small, sunlit corner of our apartment's living room. Daniel was in the bedroom, door closed, pacing. I heard him muttering, complaining about something, as usual. Only this time, I noticed the harshness in his tone. He was not just venting to himself, he was speaking with someone on the phone. The words traveled through the thin walls. "She's literally useless except for house stuff," he said. "Yeah, exactly. She's not going to get that job, trust me. And if she did, well, I'd make sure it doesn't happen. Don't worry." For a second, I stopped breathing. I didn't expect him to be so brazenly cruel, especially since he believed I couldn't hear him. A chill ran up my spine. That was the moment, rather, the final push, that told me to take action. Because if Daniel could so confidently proclaim that he'd sabotage me, then I had to assume he was actively doing so. I tried to keep my voice from trembling as I placed the last towel on the couch. The last thing I wanted to do was burst into the bedroom and start screaming accusations. That would be a wasted confrontation, one that would only give him the upper hand by making me look reactionary and unstable. I was neither. I had grown too wary, too careful. Instead, I stayed quiet and eavesdropped. When he finished his call, Daniel stepped out of the bedroom with that usual smirk plastered across his face. He peered down at me as though I was a child. I recognized the condescending tilt of his head and the little twitch at the corner of his mouth that said, "I own this room." Without an ounce of remorse, he walked into the kitchen, rummaged for a soda, and turned to me. "You fold my shirts yet?" he asked. I remember my own heartbeat in my ears as I forced a smile. "They're in the laundry basket," I replied. "Ready for you." "That's what I like to hear," he said with a chuckle. Then he grabbed his car keys and strolled out, leaving me to the mild hum of the fridge and the echoes of his telephone words reverberating in my head. I'd make sure it doesn't happen. The cruelty of his confidence was appalling, but it was exactly what I needed to confirm my next steps. People might expect me to have confronted Daniel right then, demanded an explanation, or tearfully cried out that this was unacceptable. But no, my reaction was far more tempered. Perhaps it was the sense of inevitability. Perhaps I'd known all along that he never believed in me. This was simply confirmation, the final puzzle piece. For months quietly, I'd been preparing. I carefully tucked away any money I could scrape from my side gigs, freelance proofreading, occasional tutoring, and even a small consulting job I took on for a family friend who ran a local store. None of these things generated a fortune, but they gave me enough to start a modest nest egg. And I never told Daniel. If I mentioned any new source of income, he would find a way to belittle it, or worse, claim it and use it for himself under the pretense of managing our finances. I also met, secretly, with a recruiter who specialized in the field I aspired to enter, technical writing and communications. We built up my resume piece by piece. The recruiter taught me how to highlight my experiences and craft a narrative that would make me look attractive to prospective employers. Every time Daniel thought I was off in the corner, crocheting or reading a magazine, I was actually polishing a new draft of my resume or writing a cover letter. Every time I left the house for groceries, I might have actually been downtown at a coffee shop, reviewing job listings and writing to potential employers. So when Daniel sneered at me that Friday, I was already beyond the heartbreak stage. I was stepping onto a new path, a path that would soon lead me to the job of my dreams. In the hush of our apartment that afternoon, I allowed myself a small, cryptic smile, because I knew something he did not. I already had a second interview scheduled with a thriving tech company across town, and if everything went according to plan, I'd receive the final job offer by next week. In that moment, I could have confronted him. I could have shouted, "I know what you're doing and you won't succeed." But I stayed silent. Let him believe I was docile and helpless. Let him imagine I'd be stuck vacuuming his floors for life. It would only make my final victory that much sweeter. 4 months earlier, at the faintest whiff of Daniel's disregard for me, I had begun shifting little pieces of my life into safer places. It started with money, yes, but it didn't end there. I opened a new bank account in my name alone. Then I discussed with a friend, an attorney, how I might proceed should I need separation or legal measures. The attorney advised me on dividing assets and directed me to keep detailed records of our finances, so I documented everything: receipts, bank statements, any unusual transfers or suspicious charges. I was appalled at how many times Daniel used our joint bank account to pay for expensive dinners with his friends, or to gamble on sports, or to purchase high-tech gadgets that he promptly hid away in his personal trunk, as though I had no right to question him about it. Quietly, I maintained an updated file in a secure cloud folder. There, I kept digital copies of everything, including text messages in which Daniel had insulted my abilities or threatened me to stay in my place. I was no longer the starry-eyed newlywed who believed he would come around. No, by then I was methodical, calm, intent on self-preservation. The day I got the call to schedule my second interview with Horizon Tech Solutions, I played it cool, talking to them in hushed tones while Daniel was at work. He never suspected a thing because he never bothered to ask how I spent my days. In his mind, I was as unimportant as the chores he assigned me, but I was far from unimportant. Behind the scenes, I was applying to positions that matched not only my qualifications, but also my passion. I specialized in technical documentation, the perfect blend of writing, detail orientation, and creativity. I'd spent hours reading about the new wave of software rollouts and user guides. I loved it, and I was good at it. The pieces were falling into place. Saturday arrived, and Daniel decided to invite 2 of his close buddies over for drinks. In the living room, they laughed loudly and carried on in a raucous display of male bonding. I tried to stay out of their way, partly for my own peace and partly to remain invisible, as they all seemed to appreciate me more when I was physically absent. But after Daniel had a few beers, I heard him bragging. "She's never had a real job," he said, his words a little slurred. "She thinks she can handle some fancy corporate gig, but she can't, and she never will. Some people are just not cut out for that. All the same, at least it means I always have a clean home and a hot meal." His friends chuckled, clinking bottles. I paused in the kitchen, out of sight, gripping the edge of the counter. My heart hammered in my chest, but I reminded myself that I was in control. Let him continue. Let him marinate in his arrogance. They went on to share crude jokes, and every once in a while, one of them would speak to me over the back of the couch in that same condescending tone, calling out, "Hey, can we get some snacks?" Or, "Another round, please?" Almost like they were used to me as a servant. I obliged, meticulously neutral on the surface, but inside I was boiling. Daniel gave me a theatrical wink as I handed him a plate of pretzels. "Good job, honey," he sneered. "At least you're good at chores, right?" I locked eyes with him for half a second. Then I calmly turned away and returned to the kitchen. He wasn't worth the effort of a scornful reply. I had better places to focus my energy. I had an interview to rehearse for on Monday morning. What Daniel and his friends didn't know was that I'd already aced the first round of interviews. Monday's second interview was primarily a formality, and a chance for me to meet the department head. It went better than I dared hope. My meticulous preparation paid off. The department head liked my writing samples and admired my clear passion for the work. By Monday afternoon, I had an offer in my inbox. A full-time position as a technical documentation lead with a salary more than double what Daniel ever earned in a single year. I stared at the email. My chest filled with an exhilarating mixture of excitement, relief, and a sense of triumph. But I had to stay calm. I had to remain strategic. I did not want to tip Daniel off to my good news just yet. Not until I had my official letter signed and my start date locked in. By Wednesday evening, it was all sealed. I would begin on the 1st of the following month. But Daniel didn't pay attention to such details. He was too busy flaunting his own imagined superiority, too consumed by his own illusions. And so his unraveling began, one he didn't even see coming. You see, Daniel wasn't the only one living a secret life. He had been funneling money from our joint account into sports bets. I discovered this by comparing the bank statements with the check stubs I'd found in his office desk. The sums were significant. Sometimes he'd lose big and then scramble to shift money from savings to cover the losses. But as the amount soared, he found himself in a predicament. He needed me to deposit my household allowance, or any spare cash so that the account didn't dip into the negative. And for the past month, I had deliberately withheld depositing any extra funds, storing them in my private bank account. At first, Daniel didn't notice. Then, over the course of about 2 weeks, I heard him cursing under his breath as he pored over the bills. "Where the hell's all the money going?" he muttered. "Why isn't she contributing more? She's home all day. She can't be using that much up." It only got worse. He tried to place another bet, only to find our joint account dangerously low. Then came the late-night phone calls with ominous-sounding men, presumably some unscrupulous bookies, demanding he pay up. He tried to hide his anxiety from me, but he did a poor job. He grew edgy, snapping at every little inconvenience. He kicked a chair the night he realized I had quietly moved part of my paycheck from tutoring into my private account. He demanded I show him my bank statements. I politely reminded him we decided I would manage my tutoring money for household supplies and that I was already paying many of the bills. He demanded more, growing desperate. Meanwhile, I remained outwardly calm. I suspect this irritated him even further. He was used to me bending to his will, but the old dynamic was dead. I was too close to my breakthrough to let him sabotage me. His downfall was picking up speed. I started my new job on a crisp Monday morning, just as fall was drifting into the city. My excitement was indescribable. An office of my own, friendly colleagues who valued my writing expertise, a supportive corporate culture that rewarded merit, and a salary that made me giddy every time I looked at the numbers on my contract. But I still played my cards close to my chest. I didn't shout my triumph from the rooftops. I woke up earlier than Daniel each day, left the apartment for work with a simple goodbye, and returned in the evening to find him growing more and more agitated. Rather than celebrating with him, I let him believe I was simply going out to do chores or run errands. I wanted to watch him scramble, watch him realize he no longer had full financial control. Within 2 weeks at Horizon Tech, my manager singled me out for praise. They loved my documentation style. I made complex ideas easy to understand. On top of that, my background in tutoring gave me a knack for patiently explaining topics. My colleagues often swung by my office with questions, and I found I thrived on helping others. It felt so fulfilling. Meanwhile, Daniel's mounting bills and unsuccessful bets left him short on cash. He turned to me one night, 2 days after I'd signed my official benefits package, and said, "Can you spot me a little money to help cover the mortgage this month? I'll pay you back as soon as my new sports bet comes through." I almost laughed out loud. After everything, now you come begging? But I simply shrugged and asked, "What money?" "I don't really have much saved. You know, since I'm just good for house chores only." I didn't even bother disguising the wry edge in my voice. He stared at me, dumbfounded, as though it had just dawned on him that I was no longer under his thumb, and that was only the beginning. A few nights later, as the bills piled up, Daniel grew irritable. He started calling me worthless, telling me that if I was any kind of supportive wife, I'd help bail him out of this temporary situation. His tactic of guilt-tripping me would have worked a year ago, but not anymore. I calmly mentioned that he might need to downsize his expenses, perhaps cut back on the sports gambling, perhaps pick up a second job. He turned red, sputtering that he'd never stooped so low, that it was the man's job to be the provider. I arched an eyebrow. "Really? I haven't seen much providing from you lately," I said. Then I returned to my laptop, reviewing a new manual I was writing for the office. He had never looked so powerless. One chilly autumn evening, about a month into my job, I walked into our apartment to find Daniel slumped on the couch, staring at a piece of paper in his hands. He looked up at me, the arrogance drained from his face. There was something like fear behind his eyes. "What's that?" I asked, more curious than concerned. He dropped the paper on the coffee table. "Foreclosure notice," he muttered. "The mortgage has fallen behind, and they're threatening to take the apartment. I need your help, or we could lose everything." I gazed at him, feeling neither triumph nor pity, more like clarity. For years, this was a man who had insisted that I had no worth outside of cooking his meals and scrubbing his floors. He had publicly humiliated me, telling his friends how incapable I was. He had belittled my ambitions. And now, here he was, undone by his own reckless choices, literally pleading for my financial aid. I stepped forward, studying the notice. Indeed, the numbers were steep, the threat real. Could I help pay it off? Undoubtedly. My new salary plus the savings I'd been hiding away made me more than capable of handling it. But I'd already made my decision. There would be no further unity between us. "I'm sorry, Daniel," I said quietly, "but I'm afraid I can't help." He gaped at me as though I'd just shoved a dagger into his chest. "What do you mean you can't help? You're my wife." I shook my head. "You told me I'd never amount to anything. You told me I'd never have a real job, yet here I am. And now you're asking for money? I spent years with you laughing at me, telling me my place was beneath you." I paused. "Well, I finally know my worth. And it's not here, paying off the debts you racked up." His face twisted with anger, then desperation. "So, what? You're just going to let them take the apartment? Where will we live?" I almost wanted to laugh at the use of we. He'd never once included me as an equal partner. Now it was convenient to do so when he needed me. "I don't know about you," I said, "but I've been planning to move out." Panic raced across his features. No, you can't. You're my wife. We can work this out. I'll stop the gambling. I'll treat you better. Whatever you want." He was flailing, but it was too late. I was already sure of my path. Without another word, I walked into the bedroom, grabbed my suitcase, and began packing. I didn't need to explain myself further. My attorney friend had already prepped me for this. I knew my rights, and I had all the paperwork in order. As I zipped up my suitcase, I glimpsed Daniel in the doorway, his eyes wide with shock. "Don't do this," he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need you." I paused and looked at him. I remembered the times I'd needed him. Financial support, emotional support, even just simple respect. And how he had spat on every opportunity to provide it. So I turned away. "It's too late," I said, my voice steady. "I've already signed a lease for my own place across town. I start moving in tomorrow." His jaw dropped, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Then he tried one last tactic. Rage. "You can't just walk out. I'll sue you for the mortgage. You're on the paperwork, too." I took a deep breath, my heart thumping in my chest, but kept calm. "Talk to my lawyer, and good luck with your attempts." Leaving the apartment that night felt surreal, but also freeing. I hailed a cab to a modest hotel and spent my first night truly independent. In the morning, I went to work at Horizon Tech with a bright smile. Everyone congratulated me on finishing my latest documentation draft early. My manager commended me in front of the entire department. I felt unstoppable. Over the next week, I moved into a small but cozy studio. It was mine. All mine. Daniel tried to call incessantly, leaving apologetic voicemails. I refused to respond. My attorney friend handled communications. As the reality sank in that I wouldn't come to his rescue, Daniel's tone changed. He grew nasty, threatening lawsuits and demanding I come back. But the ship had sailed. Days turned into weeks. I immersed myself in my job, forging friendships with my colleagues. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, I was invited to dinner at a coworker's house, where I was treated like family. Ironic, given how my own husband had treated me in the home we once shared. One evening, as I was heading out of the office, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Out of curiosity, I picked it up. It was Daniel, calling from a new line, voice trembling. "I lost the apartment," he said by way of greeting, no preamble. "I'm basically on the street." There was a pause, and I heard him swallow painfully. "Please. I know I messed up, but it's been so hard. I'm in a bad place. Could you maybe give me a place to crash? Just for a bit? Or, lend me some cash?" I listened to him, my heart surprisingly calm. This was the man who, not even 2 months prior, belittled me with every breath he took, used me for chores, bragged to his buddies about how useless I was. Now he was homeless. His own words. "I'm basically on the street." I leaned against a street lamp, looking out at the vibrant lights of the city. "I'm sorry," I finally said, "but there's nothing I can do." He let out a quiet sob, then a feeble, "Okay," and the line clicked dead. I stared at the phone for a moment, tears of relief prickling my eyes, but there was no sadness. Only the final closure of a door that should have been shut a long time ago. That night, I had dinner with a group of colleagues at a nearby bistro. We laughed about a comedic blunder in one of our product demos earlier that week. My new life was as bright and promising as the city lights reflecting off the restaurant's glass windows. Looking back, it was poetic justice. Daniel's hubris was his undoing, his condescending attitude, his reckless financial decisions, his utter underestimation of me. And my quiet strategy had paid off. I extracted myself from a toxic situation, found success in a career I love, and built an independent life where I could truly flourish. Sitting there, sipping my hot tea at the end of our meal, I realized the full extent of how far I'd come. How I once was a woman who felt worthless, belittled at every turn. How I'd grown into someone who could stand tall on her own merits. The best revenge wasn't wrath or some dramatic confrontation. It was my success, my happiness, my freedom. I would never be just good for house chores again. I had proved foremost to myself that I was capable of more than Daniel or his friends ever imagined. And as for Daniel, he learned, too late, that a strong and intelligent woman should never be underestimated.